Scream came before the glass broke. It ripped across the midnight diner so sharply that every fork stopped in midair, every drunk trucker turned, and every tired waitress froze with plates in their hands. Natalie Miller spun toward the sound and saw the one thing she had spent 19 months trying to hide from the world. Her baby boy was standing in the middle of the diner floor, tiny legs shaking inside metal braces, one little hand lifted toward a man twice her height, a man in a black coat. A man with a silver ring shaped like a crown, a man whose face turned the entire room cold the second he looked down at the child. Leo's blanket had fallen away. The fluorescent lights burned against his pale skin, his little fangs were stuck halfway out, and his impossible violet eyes were fixed on the stranger's face like he had known him all his life. "Mama," one of the old customers whispered in horror, crossing himself. "What kind of baby is that?" Natalie dropped the coffee pot. It shattered at her feet, hot liquid splashing over her ankles, but she did not feel it. She only felt fear, because the man Leo had just reached for was not a stranger. He was the monster from the alley, the one night she had buried in silence, the one face she had never forgotten, the father. Rain slammed against the diner windows like fists. Neon light flickered over the greasy floor. Leo made a soft clicking sound in his throat, happy, innocent, reaching again. Natalie ran so fast she nearly slipped, snatched him up against her chest and covered his face with the blanket. "Don't look at him," she whispered, though she did not know if she was speaking to Leo or herself. Her heart was beating so hard it felt painful. Across the room, every customer had gone silent. Even Rick, the cook who never shut up, stood frozen behind the counter with a spatula in his hand. The black-coated man did not move right away. He simply watched her, tall, pale, still, the kind of stillness that didn't belong to human beings. Then he smiled, and that was worse. It was not warm. It was the smile of a predator that had finally found something it lost. "Interesting," he said softly. His voice rolled through the room like distant thunder. "Very interesting." Natalie backed away. "Stay away from my son." The two men standing behind him shifted instantly, one on each side, huge and silent like bodyguards carved from stone. But the man in the center lifted one finger and they stopped. He took one slow step forward. The lights above him buzzed and dimmed. "Your son," he repeated. "Is that what you call him?" Natalie's hands tightened around Leo until she feared she might hurt him. "I said stay away." Leo tugged at her apron and made another soft, excited hiss. He was smiling, at the king of monsters. Natalie had survived on too little sleep and too much fear for almost 2 years. She had learned how to work double shifts while hiding a child who blistered in sunlight, cried without sound, and drank butcher's blood mixed with iron vitamins because nothing else kept him alive. She had learned how to lie to doctors, learned how to sew blackout cloth into stroller covers, learned how to smile when customers asked why her baby never laughed out loud, why his skin was always cold, why his eyes looked like gems underwater. She had learned to live poor, tired, and always ready to run. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. Nothing had prepared her for the father walking into a dead-end Seattle diner on a rainy Tuesday and looking at her child like the world had just shifted under his feet. "Natalie," Rick hissed from behind the counter, voice shaking. "Who the hell is that?" She didn't answer because she didn't know what answer would make sense. King, monster, nightmare, mistake, destiny, none of them sounded sane. The man's black eyes moved over the blanket, the stroller, the braces sticking from beneath the cloth, and then to Natalie's face. Recognition bloomed there slowly like poison spreading through water. "The alley," he said. It was not a question. Natalie felt the room tilt. "Please," she whispered, "please just leave." He ignored the plea. 19 months, he murmured almost to himself. "I should have smelled it sooner." One bodyguard inhaled sharply, the other stiffened. Now Rick looked like he wanted to crawl into the oven and hide. "Boss," the bigger guard asked carefully. The dark-haired man never looked away from Natalie. "Clear the diner." His tone stayed quiet, but everybody obeyed. Every customer rose too fast. Chairs scraped. Plates crashed. Men who had been half-drunk moments ago rushed toward the door without demanding their change. Rick ducked behind the counter, fumbled for his coat, and fled through the kitchen exit. In seconds, the diner was empty except for Natalie, Leo, and the three men dressed like death had learned tailoring. Rain hammered harder. The open sign buzzed red in the window. Natalie stood alone with her child in the middle of a silence so complete she could hear Leo's tiny breathing under the blanket. "What do you want?" she asked, and hated how small her voice sounded. The man looked at her as if the answer should have been obvious. "I want to know why you are carrying my blood in a public diner." The words hit like a slap. My blood, not my son, not a child. Blood. Natalie felt anger stab through the terror. "He's not a secret you get to claim because it's convenient," she snapped. "You disappeared. I nearly died bringing him into this world. He can't eat normal food. He can't sleep without darkness. Doctors think he's dying. And now you walk in here and talk like he's property." The king's eyes flashed, and for one terrible second she thought he might strike her. Instead, he went still again. Even colder, even more dangerous. "Show me his face." "No, show me." "No." His bodyguard on the right moved so fast Natalie barely saw him. One second he was by the booth, the next he was at the locked front door turning the deadbolt with a metallic click. She jumped. Leo whimpered, not with fear but with discomfort from the light. The king's gaze dropped to that sound and something changed in his expression. Not softness, not yet, but something alive. "He's in pain," he said. Natalie stepped back. Because of the lights. That was the first crack in him, a tiny one, barely visible, but she saw it. The monster noticed the pain before he noticed the threat. Then he spoke to his men without taking his eyes off the bundle in her arms. "Shut them off." Instantly the bodyguards moved. One cut the diner lights. The other yanked the glowing signs from the windows. The room fell into dim storm shadow, lit only by gray rain and the weak light from the kitchen. Leo relaxed against her chest. The king noticed that too. He took another step forward. Natalie should have run, she knew that. Every instinct screamed at her to bolt through the kitchen, take the alley, disappear into wet Seattle streets and never stop. But she had run for 19 months and it had gotten her nowhere except broke, exhausted and scared of every stranger who looked too closely at Leo. So she stayed. "If you touch him without my permission," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "I swear to God I will kill you." One bodyguard actually laughed. The sound died instantly when the king lifted his hand. He was staring at her now with a kind of shocked fascination. "You would threaten me," he said softly. "For a child you know is not entirely human. He's entirely mine." The answer came without thought. It filled the room. And this time the crack in the king widened. He looked at her like he had expected fear, pleading, maybe lies, but not that. Never that. Slowly, carefully, Natalie lowered the blanket just enough for Leo's face to show. The boy blinked up at the shadows with those impossible violet eyes. His pale curls were damp with sweat. His little mouth parted in a smile when he saw the man before him. Then with a soft sound of delight he reached out again. The king did not breathe. Natalie could see that now. Not one inhale, not one exhale, total stillness, as if the whole world had been paused around him. Leo's tiny fingers touched the black sleeve of his coat. The king flinched, not from disgust, from impact. He slowly knelt. A man who looked born to stand above everyone in the world sank to one knee on the diner floor in front of a child in cheap braces and a grease-stained waitress who had just threatened his life. His bodyguards looked stunned. Natalie forgot to blink. Leo patted the king's sleeve, then his wrist, then grabbed one pale finger in both hands with all the weak determination of a child trying to claim the moon. "Impossible," the king whispered, but it did not sound like denial anymore. It sounded like grief. "My lord," one bodyguard said under his breath, nervous now. The king silenced him with a glance. His dark eyes stayed on Leo. "The eyes," he murmured, "the resonance, the scent." Then he looked at the braces and the joy vanished from his face. Something uglier replaced it. Rage. "Who did this?" Natalie stared at him. "Did what?" He pointed. "His legs." "Nobody did anything. He was born like that." The king's jaw clenched so hard she heard the teeth grind. "No royal child is born weak." Natalie almost laughed from the absurdity. "Well, yours was." That should have been a fatal thing to say. Instead he closed his eyes for 1 second like the truth had physically struck him. When he opened them again, the black in them seemed deeper, heavier. "What is his name?" "Leo." He repeated it in a low voice, tasting it. "Leo." Leo squealed happily and tugged his finger. That tiny sound shattered something final in the king's face. His expression did not become gentle. It became wrecked, like a man watching a ghost smile back at him. Then the diner door exploded inward. Cold air rushed in. Rain sprayed across the floor. Four pale figures in silver coats stormed through the doorway with blades already drawn. Natalie stumbled back with Leo in her arms. The king rose in one fluid movement, all softness gone so fast it felt unreal. The lead intruder was a beautiful woman with gold hair and a cruel mouth. She looked straight at the child, then at Natalie, and began to laugh. "I knew it," she said. "I knew the rumors were true." Her gaze slid to the king. Blackwood, kneeling in filth for a half-breed cripple. "Oh, this is delicious." Natalie went cold, so that was his name, Lucian. The woman stepped forward, ignoring the bodyguards. The circle already suspected disloyalty, but a defective heir. Her smile widened. "You've handed your enemies a gift." Lucian moved in front of Natalie and Leo so fast he blurred. "Isabel," he said, and his voice was so quiet it sounded like the silence before a storm breaks cities. "You should have stayed ignorant." Isabel twirled one silver knife between her fingers. "You should have killed it before I smelled it." Natalie clutched Leo tighter. He buried his face against her neck, disturbed now by the violence in the air. Lucian's shoulders hardened. "Call him it again," he said, "and I will feed you your own heart." The diner became a battlefield in one heartbeat. Isabel lunged. Lucian met her in the middle with a movement too fast for Natalie's eyes. Bodies hit walls. Metal screamed. One of the silver-coated vampires vaulted over a booth toward Natalie, only to be intercepted by Lucian's bigger guard, who snapped the attacker's arm backward with a sound that made her stomach twist. Another attacker came through the kitchen, hissing, sword raised. Natalie ducked behind the counter with Leo in her arms just as a coffee machine exploded over her head. Glass rained down. Leo started trembling. "It's okay, baby, it's okay," she whispered, though nothing was okay. Through the shattered shelves she saw Lucian fighting Isabel in the center of the diner. He moved like darkness had taken human shape. Every blow he landed cracked tile, bent steel, shattered wood. Isabel was fast too, all silver flashes and laughing cruelty, but she was losing. She looked toward Natalie suddenly and smiled. "Burn the child," she screamed. A man in silver coat turned and raised a small black weapon Natalie had never seen before. Not a gun, something worse. It hissed to life with blue flame. She ran. There was nowhere to run, but she ran anyway, slipping on syrup and broken glass, clutching Leo against her chest as the first blast of fire tore through the air behind her. Heat licked her back. She heard Lucian roar. Then a blur slammed into the attacker so hard both men crashed through the front window and vanished into rain. Natalie reached the far wall, trapped. Leo was crying now, not loudly, never loudly, but in panicked, clicking sobs that broke her heart. Isabel landed between Natalie and the only exit, hair wild, eyes glowing silver white. "Give me the defect," she purred. "I'll make it quick." Natalie grabbed the nearest thing her hand touched, a metal pie stand, and swung it with every ounce of strength in her body. Isabel laughed as it bounced off her shoulder. "Adorable." Then Leo looked up. For one split second, the child's violet eyes blazed. Every spoon, knife, fork, and broken shard of metal in the diner lifted into the air. Natalie felt the world stop. Isabel's smile vanished. The floating metal trembled, then launched forward in a screaming storm. Isabel barely got her arms up before silverware slammed into her from every side like bullets. She was hurled backward across the room, pinned to the wall by steak knives through her sleeves, forks through her coat, twisted metal trapping her in place. The entire diner shook. Plates shattered. Windows burst. Natalie dropped to her knees, staring. Leo sagged weakly in her arms the second it was over, exhausted, his small body suddenly too limp. Lucian turned and saw it all. For the first time since entering the diner, true fear hit his face. Not fear for himself, fear for the baby. He was at Natalie's side in an instant. "He used power," he said sharply. "He should not be able to do that." Natalie's hands shook. "What does that mean?" Lucian touched Leo's forehead with trembling fingers. The tenderness of that touch would have looked impossible on anyone else in the room. "It means," he said, voice cracking with something dark and urgent, "they were wrong about why they wanted him dead." Outside, thunder rolled over Seattle like war drums. Inside, Isabel ripped one hand free from the wall and started laughing through blood. "Do you see it now?" she hissed. "He isn't weak, Lucian. He's dangerous." Lucian slowly rose, turning toward her with murder in every line of his body. "So am I," he crossed the room. Isabel tried to sneer, but there was fear under it now. Real fear. Lucian gripped her throat and yanked her free from the knives, pinning her to the wall. "Listen carefully," he said, lifting her until her boots dangled above the ruined floor. "You came here to report treason. You came here to expose a defect, but if the Circle learns what he really is—" Isabel went still. Natalie saw the truth hit her, not defect. Weapon. Lucian leaned closer, his face inches from hers. "You will forget this child exists." Isabel bared her teeth. "And if I do?" Lucian's smile this time was far worse than hers had ever been. "Then I will kill every person who has ever spoken your name." He threw her through the broken front door into the rain. For a second there was silence again. Only rain, only Leo's weak breathing, only Natalie kneeling on the wrecked floor of the life she had barely managed to keep together. Lucian turned back to her. The king was gone now, or maybe not gone, split open. She saw the ruler, the predator, the monster, but she also saw the father, horrified, furious, changed. "We leave now," he said. Natalie held Leo tighter. "I'm not going anywhere with you. You are if you want him alive." "You don't get to order me, Natalie." He said her name like a plea hidden inside a command. "They will come in waves now. Hunters, council spies, rivals. The moment Isabel decides fear is worth less than ambition, your son becomes prey. This diner is ash already. Your old life is over." She wanted to scream at him, hit him, tell him this was his fault because it was. Instead, she looked around at the shattered glass, the broken booths, the blood on the tile, the rain pouring through the missing windows, and knew he was right. Leo whimpered in her arms, then went frighteningly still. Lucian saw it and was beside her again in an instant. He touched the child's throat, wrist, chest. His expression darkened. He burned too much too fast. "What does that mean?" Natalie asked, panic rising. Lucian looked at her, and for the first time there was nothing kingly in his face at all. Only naked fear. "It means if I don't get him home tonight," he said, "our son will die before sunrise." Natalie stopped breathing. "Our son." The words cut through everything, rage, terror, disbelief, and left only the truth. Leo stirred weakly, tiny fingers curling against her apron. Lucian held out his arms, not demanding, not forcing, asking. That was what finally undid her. This impossible man who looked made of winter and violence, standing in the wreckage of a diner, asking her for trust he had not earned because a child neither of them knew how to save was slipping away between them. Natalie's eyes burned. Her whole life had been one long lesson in not trusting men, not trusting luck, not trusting promises. But Leo's body felt too cold, too small, too tired. So she did the most dangerous thing she had ever done. She stepped forward and placed her baby in the vampire king's arms. Lucian took Leo like he was holding something holy. He looked down at the child, and the room seemed to bow around that moment. His face changed again, not softer, not weaker, but devastated by love so sudden and violent it looked like pain. Leo, barely awake, lifted one hand and touched Lucian's jaw. The king closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were no longer empty black. They were burning with purpose. He looked at Natalie over their son's head. "From this moment," he said, voice low and deadly, "anyone who wants him will have to come through me." Then he turned toward the shattered doorway and the rain beyond. Natalie stared at his back, at the child in his arms, at the ruined life behind her and the nightmare waiting ahead, and understood with a sick twist in her stomach that this was not rescue. It was war, and she had just stepped onto the losing side of it. The doors of Blackwood Manor slammed open before the car even stopped. Natalie barely had time to step out before the night swallowed them. The estate rose above the ocean cliffs like a black cathedral carved from shadow, every window glowing faintly like watchful eyes. Wind whipped her hair across her face as Lucian carried Leo through the massive gates without slowing. Servants and guards scattered instantly, bowing their heads the moment they saw the king's expression. Something was wrong, very wrong. "Doctor," Lucian barked, his voice echoing through the marble hall. "Now." His tone left no room for hesitation. Natalie hurried behind him, her heart hammering while she tried to keep up. Everything inside the manor felt impossibly large: endless corridors, cold stone walls, chandeliers glowing like moons. But none of that mattered. Leo lay weak in Lucian's arms, barely moving. A gray-haired man appeared from a side corridor carrying a leather medical case. His eyes widened the moment he saw the child. "My lord, what is this?" Lucian placed Leo gently onto a long velvet couch as if the boy were made of glass. "My son," he said quietly. The doctor froze. Natalie felt every guard in the hall tense at those two words. A son, royal blood. The doctor approached slowly and began examining Leo with careful hands. Checked the boy's pulse, his eyes, the strange faint glow still flickering in his veins. The silence in the hall stretched painfully until finally the doctor looked up, troubled. "He used power," the doctor said. Lucian's jaw tightened. "Yes. A hybrid child should not be capable of that, not this young, not with such a weak body." Natalie stepped forward anxiously. "Is he dying?" The doctor hesitated. That hesitation was worse than any answer. "His body is collapsing from strain," the man said gently. "His human and vampire blood are fighting each other. Without stabilization, he will not survive long." Natalie felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "Fix it," Lucian said immediately. The doctor sighed. "There is only one solution." The old vampire looked directly at the king. "He must be fed from the source of his bloodline." Natalie frowned. "What does that mean?" The doctor answered calmly. "He must drink from his father." The words hung heavy in the air. Lucian didn't hesitate. He rolled back his sleeve, exposing his pale wrist, and sliced his skin open with a silver blade. Dark crimson blood welled instantly. "Do it." Natalie lifted Leo carefully. The child stirred weakly, smelling the blood. Instinct awakened inside him. His small mouth latched onto Lucian's wrist and began to drink. Natalie gasped softly as color slowly returned to Leo's face. His breathing steadied. His tiny fingers gripped Lucian's sleeve with surprising strength. For the first time since the diner attack, the boy looked peaceful. Lucian, however, grew paler with every passing second. Natalie noticed it immediately. "You're hurting yourself," she whispered. "It doesn't matter," Lucian replied without taking his eyes off Leo. His voice sounded different now, quieter, rawer, like a man realizing something he had never expected to feel. "He is my son." The doctor finally nodded. "Enough." Leo released Lucian's wrist reluctantly, already drifting into sleep. The wound on Lucian's arm healed almost instantly, but he still looked drained. Natalie brushed Leo's curls away from his forehead, relief flooding her chest so strongly it almost hurt. "He's okay?" she asked. "For now," the doctor replied. "But if he uses his power again before his body stabilizes, the strain could kill him." Lucian gently took Leo back into his arms. The king who ruled entire territories stood there silently watching his sleeping child like the world had narrowed to one fragile heartbeat. Natalie noticed something strange in his expression. Fear, real fear. "They can't know," Lucian murmured suddenly. The doctor stiffened. "My lord of the council will know nothing." His voice turned cold again, the king returning in full force. "If they discover Leo exists, they will destroy him immediately." Natalie stared at him in horror. "Destroy him?" Lucian looked at her with grim honesty. "Our laws demand the execution of weak heirs." Rage exploded through her chest. "He's not weak." Lucian didn't argue. Instead, he looked down at Leo, remembering the storm of flying metal in the diner. "No," he said slowly. "He is not weak." His eyes darkened with realization. "He is something far more dangerous." Footsteps echoed suddenly from the far corridor. A tall woman in silver armor approached quickly, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "My king," she said respectfully. "News from the city." Lucian's expression hardened instantly. "Speak." "Isabel has already reached the High Council." Natalie's stomach twisted. The woman continued grimly. "She claims you are hiding a hybrid child." The entire hall fell silent again. Lucian didn't react right away. Then he gave a quiet laugh that sent chills through Natalie's spine. "Of course she did." The armored woman looked at Leo. "The council has issued a summons. They demand you present the child at the winter court gathering." Natalie shook her head. "No, absolutely not." Lucian's eyes moved to her slowly. "If I refuse," he said calmly, "they will declare treason and march their armies here." Natalie stared at him in disbelief. "So you're just going to hand him over?" Lucian stepped closer, towering over her, his voice dropping dangerously low. "No one takes my son." The words carried enough authority to make every guard in the hall bow their heads, but Natalie still saw the tension in his shoulders. This wasn't just defiance, it was preparation for war. "Then what happens?" she asked quietly. Lucian looked down at Leo again, then back at her. "We attend the court." Natalie blinked. "Are you insane?" "Possibly." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "But if the council wishes to see my heir," his eyes burned with dark confidence, "then we will give them a show they will never forget." Natalie felt the weight of those words sink into her chest. Just hours ago she had been a waitress in a cheap diner worrying about rent and groceries. Now she stood inside a vampire king's fortress preparing to face an ancient council that wanted her child dead. She looked at Leo sleeping peacefully in Lucian's arms, the tiny boy who had barely survived the world so far, and suddenly she understood something terrifying. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about power. The council believed Leo was a defect. Isabel believed he was a threat. Lucian was starting to realize something else entirely. Natalie slowly exhaled. "If we're walking into a room full of monsters," she said quietly, "then we'd better make sure they're afraid of us." Lucian studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Good," he said, "because the moment we step into that hall, everything will change." The doors of the High Council Hall opened with a thunderous echo that silenced hundreds of voices at once. The chamber was enormous, carved deep into the mountain like a cathedral built for monsters. Tall pillars of black stone stretched toward a ceiling lost in shadow, while hundreds of ancient vampires watched from marble balconies like silent predators observing prey. The air felt colder than winter. Natalie could feel their eyes on her the moment she stepped inside, and she had never felt so small in her life. Yet beside her walked Lucian Blackwood, the ruler of the Obsidian Court, calm and terrifying like a storm about to break. In his arms rested Leo, wrapped in dark velvet, his violet eyes quietly observing the sea of pale faces staring back at him. Whispers began immediately, spreading through the hall like poison in the air. Some voices hissed the word hybrid, others muttered defect, and a few laughed softly, saying the king had finally lost his mind. Natalie felt each word hit her like a knife, but she kept walking forward. Before they entered the hall, Lucian had told her something important. Never show fear to predators, because fear invites the attack. Remembering that, she lifted her chin and walked beside him as if she belonged there. Lucian noticed her courage, and for a brief moment something like pride flashed across his cold face. At the far end of the massive hall sat the High Council, 5 ancient vampires whose power filled the entire chamber like pressure before a violent storm. In the center sat High Councilman Thorn, his pale eyes studying Leo with cold curiosity. Isabel stood beside him with a satisfied smile, clearly enjoying the tension spreading through the room. Thorn leaned forward slowly and rasped, "Well, it seems the rumors were true." His gaze shifted toward Lucian. "You have brought the child." Lucian stopped in the center of the hall while hundreds of vampires leaned forward eagerly, expecting blood. "I have brought my son," Lucian replied calmly. The word son immediately caused another wave of whispers across the chamber. Thorn raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "You know the law, Blackwood," he said slowly. "A hybrid born weak must be destroyed." Natalie's fists clenched tightly at those words. Lucian did not move. Thorn continued, his voice dripping with mockery. "And yet here he stands. A crippled heir carried by a human waitress. Quite the scandal." Isabel stepped forward gracefully and said, "Shall we begin the inspection?" Natalie could feel Lucian's muscles tense beside her, and she knew he was seconds away from violence. But before he could say anything, Leo suddenly stirred in his arms. The child's violet eyes opened slowly, and for a moment the entire room held its breath. Then Leo laughed. It was a small, innocent sound, a happy sound, the first real laugh Natalie had ever heard from him. The laughter echoed strangely through the enormous chamber, confusing many of the watching vampires. But suddenly the chandeliers above them began to shake. A low vibration spread through the hall, and the marble floor trembled beneath everyone's feet. Thorne's expression changed instantly as he shouted, "What is this?" Natalie looked down in shock. Leo wasn't crying. He was giggling. Around him the air rippled like invisible waves spreading outward. Every metal object in the chamber began to tremble violently. Swords slowly lifted from their sheaths. Goblets slid across tables. The massive chandeliers twisted in the air as if pulled by unseen hands. A terrified whisper spread among the council members. Some murmured impossible, while others whispered ancient words like mind-born and sire-born. Lucian's eyes widened slightly as realization struck him. "A Psy vampire," he murmured quietly. Thorne jumped to his feet in panic. "Stop him," he shouted. But Leo wasn't attacking anyone. Instead, the child reached toward Natalie with tiny hands. The moment she stepped closer, everything stopped instantly. The trembling ended, the floating weapons dropped harmlessly to the floor, and the chandeliers became still again. Leo grabbed a lock of Natalie's hair and giggled happily. The entire council hall fell into stunned silence. It was Lucian the child had chosen. It was her. Isabel's confident smile vanished completely. "No," she whispered in disbelief. Lucian slowly looked at Natalie, then back at the council. Something had changed in his eyes, something fierce and proud. "You called him weak," Lucian said quietly. Thorne's face had turned pale. "You called him a defect." Lucian took one slow step forward. "But what you see before you is the first Psy vampire born in 400 years." Shock rippled through the hall. Council members began whispering frantically. A Psy vampire was not a weakness. It was a legend, the rarest and most dangerous bloodline in existence, a being capable of controlling matter with pure will, a weapon powerful enough to kill even ancient vampires. Thorne finally regained his composure. His voice hardened as he declared, "Then the child belongs to the council." Lucian suddenly laughed softly. "No." The single word echoed through the chamber like thunder. Thorne narrowed his eyes. "The law," he began, but Lucian interrupted coldly. "The law is obsolete, and tonight it changes." Gasps erupted throughout the hall. Then something happened that no one had ever seen before. Lucian Blackwood, the most feared vampire king in the Western Territories, slowly knelt. But he did not kneel before the council. He knelt before Natalie. The chamber exploded with shocked murmurs. No king had ever knelt before a human. Lucian gently lifted Leo and placed him into Natalie's arms before bowing his head. "This woman," he said clearly so the entire hall could hear him, "kept my son alive when my world would have killed him." Natalie stared at him in stunned silence. Lucian raised his eyes and continued, "She is not prey. She is not a servant. She is the mother of my heir." The words sent a shockwave through the council. Lucian's voice grew colder as he added, "And if any of you wish to harm them, you will have to go through me." No one moved. No one dared. Every vampire in that room understood something important now. Lucian wasn't simply protecting a child. He was declaring war for him. Thorne looked around the chamber and realized something terrifying. No one was stepping forward. Slowly and reluctantly, the ancient councilman lowered himself to one knee. One by one, the other vampires followed him. Hundreds of monsters kneeling before a human woman, and a fragile child with glowing violet eyes. Natalie held Leo tightly, overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. Lucian rose slowly beside her. In that moment, the power of the vampire world shifted forever. 3 years later, the gardens of Blackwood Manor were filled with laughter. Leo ran across the grass wearing small titanium braces while floating his toys through the air with his strange power. Lucian watched from the terrace while Natalie stood beside him. The world outside still feared them, and enemies still whispered about the child who could bend steel with a thought. But inside those walls, they had built something stronger than fear. A family. Lucian slipped his hand into Natalie's and smiled as their son played in the warm sunset light. A king is not defined by who he kills, Lucian said quietly. Natalie squeezed his hand and replied softly, but by who he protects. And that was how a poor waitress, a disabled child, and a monster king changed the laws of the vampire world forever. Now tell me honestly, if you were Natalie, would you have stepped into a world of monsters to save your child? Or would you have run while you still could? Let me know your answer in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story of danger, romance, and impossible courage, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and watch my next story about the vampire prince who fell in love with a human assassin.